Hi, I am Idilin Kura. I am the second reporter of Group 5. So this is my report, Prayer Competency, Research in OD. Much research has been focused on the competencies required for success in OD. See for instance, Adams and Callahan OD, Bushy and Gibbs 1990, Church and Wadesky and Berkey 1996, Eubanks O'Driscoll, Hagward and Daniels 1990, Head Sorensen, Armstrong and Preston 1994, Lippitt and Lippitt 1978, McDermott 1984, Nelson 1984, O'Driscoll and Eubanks 1993, Partin 1973, Shepard and Ryan 1981, Varney 1980, Warwick and Donovan 1979, Worley and Fairherm 2003, Worley and Varney 1998. We draw primarily from three studies. Shepard and Rias 1981, OD competency study is one of the earliest reports. A Delphi study with 70 OD experts generated a list of 83 items in 12 categories. More recently, Varney and his colleagues, Worley and Varney 1998, developed a list of 87 entry-level competencies in 4 categories for academic programs. And Worley and Fairherm 2003 explored 28 OD competencies with the guidance of practitioners and researchers who were early founders of the field. About 1974, a long-term effort to define OD competencies was initiated by Sullivan, 1974. Over the past 30-plus years, he and his colleagues have worked with over 3,500 individuals from around the world to generate, refine, and build a list of practitioner attributes. His intent was to define what knowledge and skills were essential to be regarded as a competent OD practitioner. The process began with a 7-item skill list for OD practitioners developed by Kenneth Benn at the National Training Laboratories in TL in the 1950s. Sullivan and Ron Lippitt expanded the list from 7 to 25 items guided by the following change phases. The first one is development of a need for change, unfreezing. What do you mean by unfreezing? Before I proceed, I want to review first about Kurt Lewin. Because Kurt Lewin developed a change model involving 3 steps. The first one is unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. The model represents a very simple and practical model for understanding the change process. For Lewin, the process of change entails creating the perception that a change is needed, then moving toward the new, desired level of behavior as the norm. The model is still widely used and serves as the base for many modern change models. Unfreezing means before you can cook a meal that has been frozen, you need to defrost it, throw it out. The same can be said of change. Before a change can be implemented, it must go through the initial step of unfreezing because many people will naturally resist change. The goal during the unfreezing stage is to create an awareness of how the status quo or current level of acceptability is hindering the organization in some way. All behaviors, ways of thinking, processes, people and organization structures must all be carefully examined to show employees how necessary a change is for the organization to maintain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Communication is especially important during the unfreezing stage so that employees can become informed about the imminent change, the logic behind it, and how it will benefit each employee. The idea is that the more we know about a change and the more we feel it is necessary and urgent, the more motivated we are to accept the change. The second is establishment of a change relationship. The third is working toward change or moving. Now that the people are unfrozen, they can begin to move. Levin recognized that change is a process where the organization must transition or move into this new state of being. This changing step, also referred to as transitioning or moving, is marked by the implementation of the change. This is when the change becomes real. It's also consequently the time that most people struggle with a new reality. It is a time marked with uncertainty and fear, making it the hardest step to overcome. During the changing step, people begin to learn the new behaviors, processes, and ways of thinking. The more prepared they are for this step, the easier it is to complete. For this reason, education, communication, support, and time are critical for employees as they become familiar with the change. Again, change is a process that must be carefully planned and executed. Throughout this process, employees should be reminded of the reasons for the change and how it will benefit them once fully implemented. Fourth, the fourth is generalization and stabilization of change, or freezing. Devin called the final stage of his change model freezing, but many refer to it as rephrasing to symbolize the act of reinforcing, stabilizing, and solidifying the new state. After the change makes the organization process goals, structures, offering, or people are accepted and frozen as the new norm or status quo. Devon found the rephrasing step to be especially important to ensure that people do not revert back to the in old ways of thinking or doing prior to the implementation of the change. Efforts must be made to guarantee the change is not lost. Rather, it needs to be cemented into the organization's culture and maintained as the acceptable way of thinking or doing. Positive rewards and acknowledgement of individualized efforts are often used to reinforce the state because it is believed that positively reinforced behavior will likely be repeated. The last, achieving a terminal relationship. In a subsequent iteration and encouraged by Audi founders Bob Tannenbaum and Richard Beckhart, Sullivan invited feedback from approximately 50 of the most recognized experts in Audi. Their task was to review the list, add items they believe were missing, and delete items they believe were not central to good audit practice. So the interest was great enough that is garnered a 90% response rate from the group. Since that initial iteration, there have been more than 20 revisions of the list. In terms of participation, the revisions have included similar requests of the recognized experts in with additional names added over time, as well as the following efforts. The first is annual reviews were conducted at National Audit Network conferences. Second, periodic reviews were held at the annual audit conference in Mexico. Third, reviews were conducted at local audit network meetings and at ASTD chapter meetings. Fourth, sessions on audit competences were delivered in Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, Ireland, India, and Russia. Fifth, feedback on the audit competency model was solicited from graduate audit classes at Pepperdine and Loyola universities. In terms of the list content and link, it has expanded and contracted over the years. From the initial list of 7 and then 25 items, the list grew to over 220 items in the early 1990s. In response to concern over the link, the list has been reviewed and produced by various processes and participants around the 14th or 15th revisions in the mid-1990s. The list was organized around a version of the action research model, including such change phases as entry, startup, assessment and feedback, action planning, intervention, evaluation, adoption, and separation. Continued efforts to refine and revise the list were continued throughout the 1990s, with the last formal revision occurring around 1999. At the time, the list contained over 175 items. This event, History of the Audit Competency List, leads to three assumptions about the current study. First, the list developed by Sullivan is exhaustive and inclusive. A large number of people representing founders of the field, new practitioners, international practitioners, and academics have reviewed, contributed to, and revised the list. The items on the list seem representative of the competencies audit practitioners should be expected to demonstrate. The list therefore has at least some face validity, and as a result of the broad input from different audit constituencies, there's a fair chance that it has some content validity as well. Second, the list is still quite long, and in some cases, the items beg measurement. For example, what exactly does prepare leadership for the truth mean? Similarly, many generic items only appear in one section of the list. For example, the item build trusting relationship only appears in the marketing section but could easily appear in other stages of the change process. So the current list may therefore be constrained in its descriptions of audit competences. Third, Sullivan's efforts have been qualitative and consensus building in purpose. He has been trying to get the field to develop and agree on the skills and knowledge necessary to practice audit. As a result, the list has not been subjected to any sort of quantitative testing, a requirement of any good competency modeling effort. Rothwell and Lidholm, 1999. We don't know, for example, whether contracting skills are any more or less important than implementation skills in successful audit practice. So the time seems right, therefore, to apply a more quantitative approach to determine whether any structure exists within the list and to explore the relative importance of various competences. Study methodology. To approach the purpose of this study, to explore the structure and utility of the competency list generated by Sullivan and his colleagues. So the following methodology was applied. First, the items were reviewed by the authors for use in a survey format. The items were screened for vocabulary, jargon, clarity, assumptions, and bias. Emery, 1980, Sodman and Bradburn, 1983. In particular, several items were double-barreled and had to be split into two or more questions. For example, one of the original items in the list was identify the formal and informal power in the client organization in order to gain further commitment and mobilize people in a common direction. This item was broken up into several items, including identify formal power and confirm commitment of resources. On the other hand, many items were considered redundant and eliminated. Second, the questionnaire was designed. The survey was organized in two sections similar to the most recent version of the audit competencies and roughly parallel. The action research process, the survey contained 9 sections. The first 2 sections, marketing and startup, roughly corresponds to the entry and contracting phase of the general plant change model. The marketing section contained 18 items and the startup section contained 13 items. The third section was titled Diagnosis and Feedback, contained 23 items. The Action Intervention Planning section contained 16 items. The fifth section, Intervention, contained 7 items. So the next two sections, Evaluation and Adoption, contained 13 and 9 items, respectively, and corresponds to the evaluation and institutionalization processes of plan change. The eighth section was titled Separation and contained 5 items. The final section presented 37 items under the heading of Other Competencies and represented a list of new items suggested by experts and other contribution to Sullivan's list of competencies. Third, the survey was placed on the web and invitation to complete the survey were sent out to all the professionals. This occurred in a variety of formal and informal ways. For example, personal invitations were made during national and international presentations by the authors. So the National Audi Network invited people through its website homepage, and an announcement and invitation were included in several issues of the Audi Institute's monthly newsletter. 364 people responded to the survey. The demographics of the respondents are shown in the table 5.1. The model respondent was American, came from the private sector, and had a master's degree. The sample represented a broad range of Audi experience. Fourth, descriptive statistics were calculated for each item. Then the analysis proceeded along two parallel tracks. The first track was an analysis with the items within a section of the survey, and the second track was an analysis of all the items together. In the first analysis, items with a section such as marketing or adoption were analyzed to determine whether items possess any underlying structure. Clusters of items measuring a similar concept were created and labeled. As part of this process, items that did not correlate with other items in the section were identified. That is, a factor analysis includes information about items that either do not correlate with other items or that are too generic and therefore correlate with too many items to be useful. For example, the item build trusting relationship in the marketing section, while no doubt important, was consistently a part of almost every cluster and therefore provided little discriminating information. In the second analysis, all 141 items were submitted to a single factor analysis so that the items from one section could correlate with items in another section. As with the first analysis path, clusters of items measuring similar concept were created and labeled, and any items that did not correlate with other items or correlated with too many items were identified. That's all. Thank you.